You can't be a great critical thinker or consequential thinker or reciprocal thinker until you start thinking outside yourself.
Hi everybody, I'm about to bring a guest on the show that I have so much admiration for, and you're going to be hearing from him in a few moments, but I wanted to start with just giving you an idea of the profound impact this person has had in my life from the moment I picked up one of his books. See, I've always been someone that when I'm within an organization, I want to be able to see ways that I can contribute the most possible. I look for the white spaces, and what happened is I picked up a book from this gentleman, Jay Abraham, Getting Everything You Can Out of All You've Got. And when I picked this up, I realized that there were so many ways that you can look within an industry or within other industries to get some amazing ideas that can help you grow a business in ways you never thought possible. And what we're going to be discussing today are going to be these elements of critical thinking. And it doesn't matter here if you're the person that owns the business, if you're leading a team, or you're an employee within the business. You're going to learn the tools that it takes to be the person that innovates within the company. You're going to think so differently than you've ever thought before on how are the ways that you can look outside of what you're doing and bring those ideas internally. It's my immense pleasure and privilege to bring Jay Abraham onto the show for Impact to talk about critical thinking. Jay, thank you for being here and welcome.
Jason, first of all, wow, you put me in a pedestal. Now I've got a performance anxiety.
And I know you are going to be doing fine. You know what's fascinating is when we started having a conversation about doing this together.
Yes.
It was so hard to find what should we talk about because you've done so many things in so many areas. And you've talked about strategic management. You've talked about sales, marketing. You've led businesses to grow exponentially. You've worked with the Fortune 500. So how did we actually find ourselves getting the essence of what someone could apply was actually quite difficult. And your pieces on critical thinking, I think, are the most valuable because you think so differently and you see things that most people don't. And I'd be curious to know, how did you become that person that thinks so laterally?
It's a great question, and the answer is it's almost laughable because it wasn't intentional, it was accidental, like the accidental tourist, the accidental critical thinker. I started out at age 18, got married, had 2 kids, no skill set whatsoever, the need of somebody about 40 and nobody cared, and the only people that ever gave me opportunity were crazed entrepreneurs who would stick me in a room and say, kid, you can have a piece of whatever you create. And I was very interested in lots of different industries, and because I wasn't salaried, I jumped around, and I went from one, not job, but one industry to another, to another, to another. And after a number of these, I look back and thought, wow, it's interesting that people in one industry don't have a clue how people in other industries think, strategy, business models, optionality, just anything, value creation. And when you've gone through, now fast forward, now at my age, many years later, I've done over 1,000 industries, not businesses, but industries. We've done 7,000 sub-industries. When you have the ability to look at that spectrum of nuances and all kinds of different ways of thinking, doing, and you work not just giving them a seminar, but you actually are working on the front lines, dealing with the problems, dealing with the issues, dealing with the challenges, dealing with the opportunities. You get a knowledge base of possibilities, of options, of scenarios, of situations, and of consequences that are so vast that most people, because of their limited sphere of experiences, of life, of probability outcome, they don't really know. So I've just been thrust into the vortex of so many real life issues that I had to solve, embrace, manage, transcend, circumvent, that it gave me, after a while, a universal sort of an understanding of not just what can happen good and how you can make it a lot better, but what can happen bad and how to mitigate it or eliminate it or at least manage it. If that makes sense.
Absolutely, and I'd be curious, I mean, you've been through thousands of industries here.
Yes.
You've seen also, not just when it comes to the types of industries, but you've actually been around doing this for years where you've seen changes in the market happen
Yes.
from the good, the bad. I'd be curious to know what would be something that you've seen very common across the board of industries and time, like the kind of problems that seem to repeat themselves in every one of these industries.
Well, I think that the biggest problem that I see that is not really addressed very well is that owners, managers, entrepreneurs, professionals don't recognize that all of their team members have the same kind of relative hopes and dreams. They're hitching their wagon to that entrepreneur's star as well. And they're looking for that entrepreneur and that business and that commitment to produce their success, their security, their fulfillment, their economic gain. And I think a lot of times there's a big gap between me as the owner thinking about my life, my growth, my success, my net worth, my prominence, and not really recognizing that I have to be externally focused. I think the more you can cultivate, and it's very good you're talking about critical thinking because it's predicated on being able to think outside yourself. Think about all the factors, the forces, the elements, the scenarios going on and what the reality of it is and what probability, outcome, variation, all kinds of things. And you can't really do that as easily if you haven't experienced it. But the big mistake with most people is they limit their scope of reality to what they have either experienced or observed, and that's very limited relative to what's going on, reality, possibility, probability, and also danger.
And so for someone who's in the midst of, and again, it doesn't matter if you are the entrepreneur or you're working for the entrepreneur or you're within a corporation, how does one start really expanding that beyond what they've observed or they've done themselves? What are some steps that people could do to really expand on that?
Well, the first thing that I always tell people, and I don't really teach critical thinking per se, I've done some work on it, so you're drawing out of me some Rorschach first time ever responses, so hopefully it'll be reasonably lucid and concrete. But the first thing I tell people when I talk about this sort of ad hoc is you can't be a great critical thinker or consequential thinker or reciprocal thinker until you start thinking outside yourself. Meaning you have to think about what's going on in this reality everywhere else, not just with me. When this happens, what's the experience you're having? When I'm talking and you're shaking your head, are you shaking your head just to be nice, or are you shaking your head because you really understand me? Are we having the same conversation? As my intent coming across? Are you embracing it? Or are you resenting it? What is the action you're going to take, positive or negative? And that's first thing is, what are all the factors and forces that are being affected by whatever's happening? You can talk about an activity, a decision, an event, I mean, any of a number of things. And then you got to say, what is the positive, the absolute maximum positive that I can mine, that I can extract, that I can lever out of it, and what's the maximum negative that can happen? What's probable? What should I expect to happen? What is everything we do, implicitly, explicitly, consciously, subconsciously, knowingly, unknowingly, we're expecting certain outcomes. We're expecting certain responses, results. So when that doesn't happen, we're shocked. This is sort of the hilarity. I'll give you the simplest critical thinking. So when anybody in any capacity is making a phone call designed to effect a result that benefits their agenda. I don't care if you're in business, you're a salesperson, trying to get a meeting, trying to get any number of outcomes, to believe that the logical result is going to be to get a live person on the phone when you call is ludicrous. It's about a 3% probability. You're going to get a voicemail. Maybe you'll get the gatekeeper, but probably a voicemail, don't you think?
Mm-hmm.
So if you're shocked when you get a voicemail, and that's probability, not an aberration, and you haven't prepared for voicemail, that's not critical thinking. Most people go, oh, but this is Jay, and call me back. And the odds of getting called back, unless you're very, very important, are about zero. But if you say, I'm calling to remind you that we've got a way to triple your sales and reduce your expenses 20%, and we can do it tomorrow with no investment, but I need your approval. Or something that at least is designed to evoke a response. But this is a bad example, but maybe, everyone calls and goes, they're shocked when they get a voicemail. I laugh my you know what off. I think it's hilariously illogical. You're going to get a voicemail.
Yeah.
Plan for it.
So that's interesting, because in essence, what comes to mind when you say this is there's a lot of school of thoughts that says, positive thinking only. And it seems like it's actually at a compromise of critical thinking, because
I think critical is positive. What do you positively know is most probable to happen? What do you positively know could also happen? What do you positively know is the difference between being reactive and proactive? The idea of selling, a masterful, qualitative, ethical, authentic salesman or woman knows how to preempt what are probable questions, resistance, negatives, objections in the mind before they're even verbalized. That's critical thinking, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
If you don't, and somebody just says, okay, and you should know, but if you don't expect them to have thoughts while you're talking, if you don't engage them and get feedback, if you don't learn how to listen instead of just talk, then you are diluting the potential outcome that you theoretically expect. So I've gotten very, very fanatical about trying to understand what the reality of a situation is, what the probable, not just outcome, but what's really happening here with everybody involved. When I do something, when I counsel somebody, I counsel a lot of people because I've been through so many scenarios. I can say, okay, you're negotiating this. First thing you have to know is this: if you bring somebody in, you better make sure that you make sure that all the transactions are yours, not theirs. You got to make sure that and I think about everything that can go wrong with this picture, not just what goes right. And perhaps some of it is that I've been married on my third marriage, and I've had to have we've had, when we got started in our relationships, marital contracts, when you think about not just the glory of what goes right, but what goes wrong. If you get into a business partnership, do you think that every partnership lasts? Statistically, I don't know. Divorce rates in our country are about 55%. I think they actually exceed the ones that stay married, but it's probably not dissimilar into business, in business partnerships. If you think about employment, what are the odds today? If you look at, and millennials, I've done a lot of work with millennials. I'm shifting, but it's not an ADD moment. I'm going to bring it back to you. So if you look at most employers today, they have no idea how to recruit, how to maximize, manage, and really multiply the capacity of performance and duration of a millennial. Biggest problem is millennials are driven by something totally different than just hard work. They're driven by lifestyle, they're driven by feeling purposeful. They need to be dealt with totally different. If you think they're going to be motivated by what motivated people 15, 20 years ago, you're going to get a bad outcome. Also, if you think they're here to stay for a career, you're making a delusional. They're not. Their whole lifestyle is basically, I'm going to go here for a while, and then I'm going to move on. I'm going to either progress or find better environments for what gives me joy. And if you're an employer and you're saying, hey, Jason, we're going to do this for the rest of our lives, and you really believe that, you're deluded, you're intoxicated, you're erroneous in your assumption. I just want to deal. Critical thinking is reality thinking. Critical thinking is learning and recognizing what are the probable consequences of an action, an activity, a decision, an indecision, something you say, something you don't say. It doesn't matter whether you acknowledge it or not. The reality is not going to care about what you think and what you understand. It's going to do what it's going to do. And if you're aware of it and you've identified, prepared, and let's call it acknowledged and hedged, acknowledge what should happen, figured out how all of the, what I would call it, all of the layers of impact. Because we're doing this. Your hope is you can draw out of me content, ideas, realities, realizations, epiphanies that your viewers will not just enjoy, but will be impacted by. Not just entertainment, but movement.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't get that out of me, then not only has my value been diminished, but you don't look like you've done well, and I may not make it off the cutting room floor. So you have to think, okay, if Jay goes rogue on me, how can I bring him back? What am I going to do? How am I going to make sure that I advocate and draw out of him the best outcome I can? Hopefully he's lucid. If he's not, what can I softball lob him? Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
I'm just giving you a few responses.
And I love it because actually I was just thinking in the process of like, I'm listening and I try to always structure it because during our interviews, we always have a structure, which is based on what we call consciousness engineering.
And you can't structure me.
Oh, well, actually, what we look at is what are the bullshit rules that people
Yes.
believe in the world,
Okay.
and what is a new way of looking at it.
Okay,
And
I like that.
I want to position this because what we've talked about here is that a lot of people always do things the way they're done, and they'll continue doing their work without necessarily needing to think outside of what the way it's always been done.
Yes.
And what we want to introduce here is a new model of reality, which is this critical thinking element. And I want everybody to pay attention here because a lot of what we've just talked about, and you've heard Jay mention, is the fact that when you start thinking critically, it's not only about having the rose-colored goggles, it's about thinking of every single outcome. And you start challenging the status quo within your organization. And I love what you mentioned with the fact that some organizations still think that the way it's always been done is the way they continue doing it and not having the same success because the market's changed. What I'd love to bring you to is the last part of our framework, which we usually call systems for living.
Okay.
Which is, okay, I now embraced critical thinking.
Yes.
How do I, as an individual within an organization, recognize if I'm in this pattern of not critical thinking? Because some people fall into autopilot, and my hope here is somebody who's listening is kind of going, oh, okay, this is interesting, but how do I break my pattern?
Of course, it's great. Well, I think, and maybe I'm erroneous in my critical thinking, that you're going to want to transition to Socratic discussion interview. So why don't I accelerate that and integrate that so I can answer your question?
Perfect.
Okay, you want to be a great critical thinker and you have a limited amount of life experience or observation or expanded knowledge, you can look for divine intervention. And I'm not diminishing your religious or your higher beliefs, and it might happen. Or you can start Socratically interviewing people in other roles in the company and concurrently interviewing people that you know who have experienced almost anything, good, bad, ugly, and ask them for perspectives. What have you learned that will happen most obviously? What have you learned what happened? What have you learned about predictability? What have you learned about unpredictability? What in this job? What are some of the things that happen that you don't think about? What are the things that you've seen occur that nobody planned on? And you learn by asking questions and processing and being hopelessly curious and humble enough that you listen. You don't, I mean, the biggest problem with most people is they don't know how to listen. And when they listen, they don't know how to leverage the answers. And the first thing, ethically and respectfully and authentically, is to acknowledge the other person and show them that you heard what they said, you respected what it meant, you're processing the implication, and now you have an additional question that is an offshoot of that. But if you don't really hear it, I mean, if you think about it, 90% of the people that have discussion with people don't really hear what's being said. One of the great pat statements people say is, "Jason, how you doing?" And I always used to say, "Oh, I feel terrible. I've got a crick in my neck." Nobody cared because they didn't hear it because they're ready for the next comment they want to make. It's about them. And if it's about you and it's all about you and you're obsessed with you, You've lost the critical thinking, the consequential thinking. Critical thinking is just understanding all the things that are going on. Consequential thinking is taking it to a different level. What are the implications, the ramifications, the positive, the negative, the good, the bad? Who's it affecting, and how do all these dynamics come back to you, and how can you harness and harvest the maximum positive outcome, and how can you mitigate the maximum negative? I've got 3 or 4 stacked issues that I'm fanatically focused on at this point in my life. Critical thinking, consequential thinking, Socratic interviewing, relevancy. People don't realize that if you look today at our lives, this is tangential to you, and this is, you got to bring me back and we'll see critical thinking, how you do it, and I'll be pleased because I want to make this point, and then you can play off of it or get back on point. But if you look at almost everything that goes on in our life today, it is based on a foundational font of relevancy. The more relevant you are in my life, the more motivated the other side is to collaborate, to work for you, with you, love you, invite you to things, come to your things. The least relevant, the less your outcome. But relevancy it's very dynamic. I'm using myself as an example. With all humility and being clinical, my brand is very, very elevated. My stature in the business arena, in the advisory world, in the mentor world, it is very high. I've been elevated on a pedestal of expectation that is almost mythical. Now, that's good and bad. The performance expectations of people in every interaction they have with me it's outrageous. If I let them down, or if I give them something profound that is so elegantly simple, but the result of complex understanding and distillation, but it's not the silver bullet or the rock your boat that they want, my relevancy just dropped and may never come back. That's it's all contained. There's another issue that's another offshoot. I'm giving you a headache. But if you don't recognize this, you're at a disadvantage. And speaking of advantage, it's that. There are many, many tangible, intangible elements of advantage in a life, in a business. And your goal in life is to put maximum ethical, tangible and intangible advantage to your side of the T, and move maximum ethical disadvantage to, if you're in business, to the other side. I don't mean to the other side meaning your colleagues, I mean your competitors. In collaboration, which is something other people don't know how to do either. Critical thinking is the realization that you don't have the wherewithal, you don't have the bandwidth, you don't have the skill set, you don't have the talent, you don't have the energy, you don't have the time, you don't have anything to do anything by yourself. That you have to creatively collaborate. And in order to creatively collaborate, you have to be able to fuel the needs, the requirements of the other side. And if you're not a critical enough thinker to recognize what motivates you, what turns you on, what fills your need, then I can't get you to collaborate with me. I can scare you for a while, I can dangle money over you for a while, but in the long term, it's not going to work. So, I don't know if I'm getting you on tangents or this makes sense.
Well, there's 2 things that you've identified. And,
Please.
And don't worry, this is all golden because everyone who's listening will be able to follow along the journey.
Good for them.
If ever you feel that you need to have better reference, look at the summary notes where we're going to attach everything.
Thank you. That's great.
So what I first want to identify is to talk about relevancy. And I kind of want to go back to this because
Sure.
you touched on it. And I think what I fail to recognize is as things are being done mostly based on how other people are relevant. And the first thing I think about is that could be very easy for people to grasp is kind of the whole Instagram movement. How people are judging people's relevancy based on the number of followers they have. And as soon as someone gets a certain amount of follower, everybody is attracted to them. They want to collaborate with them, etc. And so, is this something that's relatively new, or has it always been this way?
Well, I think our society today, there's one thing that's immutable. It's human nature, and it will never fail. Nobody wants to be mediocre. No one wants to be irrelevant. Nobody wants to be average. We all want to be important, special, acknowledged. And how that is accomplished has changed over time. Promotion was a way of doing it. A beautiful car, a beautiful home, a beautiful wife, a Rolex. That was a way of achieving it. Designer shoes. But today, I think every human being sees and has the vehicle to be acknowledged in their own right. I mean, one of my, and it's wild, and I find it really interesting. One of my, the people that I mentor, somebody very prominent, I won't mention his name, has a business where they help people on Instagram and things like that. And they have a client who are two women who their whole claim to fame is they have big, outrageous butts, derrieres, buttocks, back ends, and all they do is show pictures of them in weird situations, and that's their identity. I think there's not a sexually, but there's a perversion of values. But I think if you bring it down to its very core, we just want to all be acknowledged as being relevant. And today, I think social media gives anybody a vehicle that can be good or it can be bad. And when you become obsessed with being acknowledged, I mean, I think for me, I was just saying, I went to an event the other night with somebody very prominent. I won't even mention his name. And they all take pictures, and I get a picture. This person's a billionaire. And I would never put that on my social media because that's not what I do. I'm a very private person, but it depends on where you are. For many years, many people were constrained to that life of quiet desperation. The Beatles, what is it? Abigail Beecher, they die by themselves. No one comes to the funeral. And I think everybody wants to be acknowledged. It's always been that way, but I think today, with social media, people have the chance and they have an infinite number of ways to be acknowledged, some very healthy, some not. And then you can become very obsessive. I think before it was repressed. Now it's released, but how it's been manifest is a little scary, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and the way that I interpret that is the fact that, we started with the whole critical thinking, and when I talk about this whole, relevancy, now that everybody almost has this own platform to make a lot of noise and there's so many signals coming in, the capacity to listen has diminished so much more today than before.
Absolutely.
And so a big process to acknowledge here is that as opposed to being, swarmed or overwhelmed by this noise that's happening all around you, to be able to critically think, you need to take a step back and really be in a position where you start listening. And when you do that, you're able to actually extract a lot more information. You're able to see things from different perspective and not just be following the herds that are just constantly making noise.
It's a profound and a very, very powerful realization. Building on it, and if you'll allow me, if you won't, I won't do it, but if you'll allow me, I will give you a life lesson that I learned and the wonderful, wonderful outcome. By the way, everyone's got to realize all of life is input, outcome, input, outcome. And if you don't recognize it, there's all these forces, elements. I'm having a little bit of an ADD moment, but it's probably worth it because there's a point of recognition that will help people in their lives. And you have all these wonderful, wonderful content that will help them harness this. But you have to realize that in life, in my opinion, and I've observed an awful lot, and I'm being a critical thinker, I'm being an empirical thinker, I'm being a historic thinker, and I'm being somebody who's looked at a lot of elements of life, business, careers, humanity, everything. 2% of what happens to us in our lives are acts of God, or the equivalent, things we have no control of. Horrible things, just terrible things, whether it's birth defects or whether they're, devastating hurricanes and things, and that's tragic. 98% of the result of things we do or don't do, decisions we make or don't make, factors, forces, elements in life that exist and are immutable that we either recognize and harness or opt not to recognize and let whipsaw us. So the first thing is we have control. We have free will if we want it. Now back to what you said. You talked about critical thinking and stepping back. There's another level if you want to be a great critical thinker. And it's deep, concentrated thinking. And that's hard to do because most of us, it's painful. We've never experienced going deep on anything. It's easy to start going deep, and it's like anything you've never done before. Go back, you don't have children yet. I have a lot of children. And if you think of anybody who's ever had children, when they first start to walk, talk, eat, drink, poop, ride a bike, they're terrible. And they fail. And it feels uncomfortable. If you've ever decided, you said you run. Unless you were very gifted, the first time you put on your Adidas or your Nikes and you went out, if you ran 25 miles and you were not winded, I would be very surprised. You probably ran half a mile and you probably felt like, you know what, and your muscles probably felt terrible the next day. But you prevailed. When it comes to critical thinking, consequential thinking, understanding relevancy, it's a process that you have to embrace and evolve. And you're not going to be very good at it. It's going to seem either stupid or painful. But the deeper you go in trying to understand what's all happening here, not just with my life, me, but what are all the implications? How's all this interacting with everybody? And you see where all the dots are and you can connect them. It elevates your comprehension of life, the situation, your career, business, your power, your ethical power, and the source of it and the force that it can positively impact at a level you can't believe. What I was going to say is something, if you'll allow me, I need to preempt.
Please.
We're talking about relevancy, but I believe I had a very profound something happen to me in my life. I'll share it because it usually touches people, and I share it very sincerely. I started when I was 18. I got married, had kids very young. I told you that. So I'm now much older. I've had 3 midlife crises, one at 40, one at 50, one at 60. I'm older than 60 now. The first 2, I'd go to a therapist, and I'd try to talk through, trying to understand what the hell happened. Because I'd make a lot of money, it didn't make me happy. I'd achieve things I wanted, didn't make me happy. A business partner that I hadn't really recognized was a sociopath would devastate me, and I'd feel violated when I had every chance of recognizing it. I just abdicated. Talk about critical thinking. It's, oh, you're great. I'm going to just basically trust you implicitly. I'm not going to protect myself. And every time I'd get into something, right on the precipice of a breakthrough, the therapist would say, 55 minutes are up. We'll complete it next week. So I'm sitting there trying to figure out the meaning of my life and having to wait. So the last time I went through one, I bought the therapist for an entire week, for 5 full days, 8 hours. And my deal was, I'll come when I have time, and if not, I will send crazed people who would never go. And it was really fun because I have a lot of people in my life who needed it but would never seek it on their own because it was paid for, they'd go. But when I went, I made a profound life shift in realization, and it changed this concept of critical thinking and everything that flowed from it. I was explaining to this therapist all the frustrations and disappointments and all the issues that didn't produce the outcomes and the feelings I wanted. And he made a very profound and very, very amazing insight. He said, the vast majority of people in life are end product oriented. They think if they make $1 million, if they get the fastest growing company, if they have the most muscled body, the most brilliant, beautiful wife, the biggest house, the most toys, that's going to really be the definitive change and the transformative event in their life. Like the heavens are going to open, the angels are going to sing, nirvana is going to trickle down, everything's going to be okay. Doesn't happen. Nothing's going to happen except for the level of complexity is going to multiply. He said, if you're end product oriented, you'll never be fulfilled. But if you're process oriented and you realize that this conversation is as good as it gets, then you're going to have a joyous life by appreciating and celebrating every interaction. And then he said something else. There's nobody who's irrelevant. There's no one who's unimportant. Now, I took that and it transformed my life. I do a lot of stuff in Malaysia, not in Malaysia, in Asia, you're there, and we have a protocol, and it's changed my life. We go there, and I get, and your members are probably going to castigate me because I like to drink wine. And I drink a lot of great wine on great airplanes because I get to go first class. So the first day I get to Asia, I'm, let's say, not of 100% of my intellectual capacity. So I hydrate and sleep. The next day I go down to the lobby and I sit and smile at everybody till they smile back. And in Asia, that's a great accomplishment. Then I get in the elevator and I face inward, not outward, and smile till people, they go like that, and they finally, then I get off the elevator at every floor and talk to all the servers about really meaningful things. And you can see their body language change because they're acknowledged. And when you start realizing one of the things, I'm coming 360 or 180, whatever it is, back to critical thinking, it stems and flows from acknowledging the relevancy of every human being that you interact with in your life, above, below you. Everyone's got value. Everyone has importance. Everyone needs to feel that you appreciate them. And when you do that, everything multiplies in terms of the success of your life, the fulfillment of your life. And now I am getting a little bit wildly rogue, but hopefully that has value.
Actually, it's fascinating because I actually see it tie in perfectly, because we talked about one of the first things to do to be better at critical thinking is to look at people within different positions within your company, also in different industries. And the book that I referenced at the beginning, your book about, 21 strategies to really grow a business and to make a bigger impact, you talk about people in every single role have something to teach, and it ties to relevancy because you realize that you can talk to somebody in customer support and they're going to give you some of the best insights on possibly how to do better your role. And again, it's a question of listening, seeing that there is relevancy in absolutely every single person. And every conversation you have is going to be something that allows you to have a better depth in the way that you think. And so I think it's phenomenal.
Well, I've been blessed in my life, and when I was young, I was not threatening and I was fascinating, so a lot of very, very much brighter and worldly people took me under their wings, and they doled out and a lot of brilliant insight, knowledge, wisdom, and I ate it up, and I had a thirst for it. One of the things that I learned early in, and it's denominated, I think, a lot of my success, and I try to urge everyone to recognize this. The first thing you need to do in all aspects of your life is slow down and then try to examine, evaluate, understand, recognize how everyone else sees life, because that is their reality and you're dealing with it in everything you do. Then you need to see what their hopes, their dreams, their values are. You need to acknowledge to them that you recognize that and you respect that. Whether you agree with them or not, this is hilarious. If I used to do a seminar experience, and I'll tell you this, but it's about the fact that no two people are ever having the same experience at the same time. I don't care if you're married to somebody and you're in an absolute alignment. You're totally having different experiences all the time. But in business, even words are differently interpreted. I used to do very, very large seminars. And once I had the trust and I had the appreciation of the audience, knowing I was going to do wildly unpredictable things, about halfway through the second day of a 3-day, I would come in purposely late. And I would say this, and it's not meant to be discriminatory. It was just meant to be experimental. I would say, oh, I'm so sorry I'm late, but I just saw the most stunning and magnificent woman I think I've ever seen in my life, and I was captivated. Then I would say nothing else, and I'd go on for 2 hours. Then I'd come back to that, and I'd say, remember when I said that? I want to know what came to mind. And I'd randomly interview and solicit the impression of 20 or 30 men and women. To some, it was crassly anatomically denominated. To some, it was more hair or ethnicity. To some, it was style and dress. To a lot of women, it was, how fashionable or how sophisticated. But almost no two people had the same perception or definition. And if you want to own ethically and meaningfully the mind share of others, you have to appreciate what their reality is, if that makes sense. This all comes around to critical thinking. If I think that you and I are having the same values, the same goals, the same interpretation, if I own the business and you work for me, I'm playing a game that I think is about me, and I want to respect you, and I pay you, and I'll give you time off and vacation. But if I understand that you basically have hopes and dreams and problems and fears and needs, and I'm not mindful of that and respectful of that, and don't make you feel that you're part of this, and don't acknowledge you, and then this is related, it's a perfect relate, it's not an ADD. I do a lot of work where people will say, Jason, I can't hire good people. And I'll say, that is such a crock. There's one of two things, this is critical thinking. You either won't hire the best and cry only once when you have to agree to pay them, or you won't hire trainable people and invest in training them in things like listening, like consultative selling, like leadership, like trust building. Because there are so many people out there that are thirsty to be made better. And most people's interpretation, this is another fallacy in critical thinking. If you ask 100 small business owners, do you train your people? They'll all say yes. But their interpretation is they train them in the processes of the business. They train them in their product line. They train them in their pricing schedule. They don't train them in how to deal with people. They don't train them in how to listen. They don't train any of the soft skills. And you guys know that soft skills they've been proven by research, by data, to improve the success, the effect, the connection of actions and people by hundreds of percent. I don't know if I'm getting into too much, but this all reconnects to critical thinking. Because you don't think about these factors, you can't harness them. If you don't harness them, you remind me, and I'm older than you and probably many of your people, but when Mad Magazine was at its peak, they had a character called Alfred E. Newman. And he was this hideous-looking guy whose motto was, what, me worry? He didn't worry about anything because he didn't care. But everything else is happening, whether you acknowledge it or not. As we're talking, life is going on. One of the greatest things that can happen to somebody who lives in a vacuum is to travel outside your comfort zone. That can mean, I get people, I say, why don't you want to have fun, why don't you study things you're not interested in? When we used to do seminars, we would go when there used to be bookstores and we'd buy all these out-of-print books, or these closeout books on nonfiction subjects. We'd buy all these magazines, and we'd say, Jason, what's your hobby? What is your hobby, Jason?
Well, right now I'm very active in health and fitness. So.
Okay, so I would give you a book on maybe cake making or rich gourmet cooking, something that was the total antithesis, and I would send you up to the room for 2 hours to read, if it was a book, 2 chapters, if it was a magazine, 2 articles, and come back and have something profound that you gained that honestly you never thought about, that had relevance either directly or indirectly, adaptable to your life. And we'd have people do this for everything, and it was amazing. I try to get people to travel outside their very limited vertical comfort zone. We call it funnel vision versus tunnel vision. I say to people, and I was going to say to you, when I go to Asia, this is sort of a little tangential, you see these whole lives, these whole cultures, you see all these millions of people going on, and you don't think there's all this stuff going on when we're sitting here. I was on the phone last night, I do things for Vietnam, and there are all these people doing things. One's got a business where they import products and sell them all over the world. One's got they sell lubricants to manufacturing factories all over Asia. All this stuff's going on, and we're sitting here thinking we're so important and limited. And the more you grasp the expanse of what's happening in your world, the more powerful you are. But you have to expand yourself to discover it. You have to be curious enough to transcend what's comfortable. I don't know if that all makes sense or not. I'm probably giving you a headache, but
Not at all. Actually, I find it just, when you speak of this, it makes me realize, like, wow, there's so much that most people don't know they don't know. And I think that's probably the problem around critical thinking.
well, I try to get people, I'm saying yes, let me acknowledge you so you know that I heard what you say and I'm going to build on it. And that's important that I acknowledge you. I believe it's very important for people to force themselves to constantly evolve. And evolution could be determined, you can define it a bunch of ways. To me, I mean, make it a point. You have friends in lots of different fields, ask them, interview them Socratically. Say, tell me about your job, tell me about what you do, tell me what your company does, tell me how you do it, tell me about the elements of your department, and learn about that, because the more you can layer, if you think about Kevlar, you know what Kevlar is?
The protective
Yeah,
armor.
it's a bulletproof vest.
Yeah.
It's a bunch of different crisscross layers of a poly material that makes you bulletproof. And the more you can make yourself bulletproof by knowledge and understanding and comprehension of not just a few things going on, but a lot of the things going on in life, the more you can basically control what happens, the more you have the ability to be a great critical thinker. You can't be a great critical thinker if the scope of your understanding are like this. The more you like that, the more insightful, the more comprehensive, the more scenario probable, and there's scenarios always going on. And if you don't understand, we're all a bunch of scenarios, don't you think?
Absolutely. And actually, I want you to expand on something that you touched on already.
Okay.
And this is basically how most people are operating in a tunnel vision, but you speak of the funnel vision.
Yes.
Can you speak more about that so people
Sure.
can grasp how to take action on that?
Yeah. So if you look at a life and you look at any variations of it, your personal life, your career, your business, it's limited very, very much to that which you know. And that which you know is limited to the experiences you've had. Most people have been in one or two fields. So their knowledge is based on the element that they have experienced in that field. And if you're just a worker, I don't mean that demeaning, but if you're working in one department, you've done that all your life, that's really all you understand. That's why a lot of attorneys are dangerous, because they're theoretical. They've not really done it. They've not been on the front lines of capitalism, so they're looking at things theoretically. But if you only have a few experiences or a few understandings to process or use as filaments that you weave into the fabric of your understanding, you are limited. So the more you force yourself to expand, if you're in, let me use this two ways. If you're in an industry and you're a business owner or an entrepreneur or a professional, first thing you want to do is observe what other people in the same industry do differently. Then you want to see related industries and see what they do differently. Then you want to see people in totally unrelated businesses. I learned, it's hilarious. When we go to do a seminar overseas, I make it a point that most people in an industry default to one way of generating business. And I make it a point, I say, okay, how many people in this room, the majority of your business is generated by salespeople? Stand up. So 20% stand up. How many online marketing? 15% stand up. How many trade shows? 15% stand up. But I'm just as analogous, not just to entrepreneurs, but to any aspect of your life. Word of mouth. Half people stand up. I'm going to come back to word of mouth for me. And I'll say, okay, I can go on and on. I do 8 different things. And I'll say, okay, well, why is it that their whole business is driven by word of mouth and you don't even use word of mouth? Their whole business is driven by, by trade shows, and you don't do trade shows. These people are doing it by webinars. But those are all additives you can add to the expanse of how you build your business. Now, the same analogy is appropriate for how you build your life, whether you're a career, whether it's personal. The more you expand your understanding of all that is going on in your world, the more powerful you are, the more interesting you are, the more, interesting, by the way, clinically, not brash, arrogant, rude. I am probably one of the most interesting people you'll ever meet. I could be on an airplane in first class, and somebody who doesn't want to even deal with me, by the time we are done on the flight, I have to respectfully ask them to stop talking so I can go back to my work, because I can engage them and ask so many interesting questions that no one's ever asked them about them, not about me. I got a great story that I can tell you if you want to hear it.
Please.
So one of the defining experiences of my life happened many years ago in Australia. Doing a big seminar, and at the time, I was the biggest seminar giver in the genre in the world, and we were going to Australia to do 3 seminars in a row. Each one we're doing $2 million a piece, which was a lot of money back then, and we were doing $5,000 and $25,000 seminars when everybody was doing 500. I'm giving you the context because I was big shit. Excuse my vulgarity. Big shit. And I flew in. My family was very tired. Went to bed. I couldn't sleep. I went up to the concierge level and started sitting down and drinking Courvoisier. I used to like Courvoisier, and that's not good, but I'm just telling it contextually. It applies to the story. So I am in this concierge room, and there's one other man. So I go over to him and I engage him in conversation. Now, I was in Australia to conduct the 3 most expensive and profitable seminars ever conducted. They were $6 million with just me talking to a bunch of entrepreneurs. That was profound back then because the average seminar was $500 and we were getting $5,000 to $25,000. I didn't tell this man anything. I just told him 2 things about myself. I was from the United States and I was here on business doing seminars. That was it. The rest of the hour and a half, I Socratically and benevolently and genuinely, with absolute profound interest, asked him questions about himself. I found out, A, he was from Germany and he worked for one of the largest pharmaceutical companies there. B, his job was traveling the entire world, visiting third world countries and selling population control systems. I was fascinated and a little bit shocked and wondering what in the world a population control system looked like, number one, how you made a cold call to sell it, what the whole presentation was like, if they bought it, what it cost, what it entailed in disseminating it, what the population felt when they were being controlled. Then I switched. I asked him about his Rolodex. I said, it must be amazing. And I asked him very candidly, are you doing this by the value of the population control system or the value of something else like under the table? Then I switched again. I said, I want to know, what are you going to do when you grow up? You got this incredible... He was there. It turned out below they were having the biggest world health minister conference. There was all kinds of security, and I was so oblivious, because I am oblivious, I didn't see it. And he was a key speaker, and he had a Rolodex, and he knew every health minister in the world, third world and otherwise. Then I said, I switched, and I want to know what it was like to live in Germany. What was the lifestyle? What was the cost of living? Private schools? What do you do on vacation? Where do you go? What do you do for hobbies? There are things that fascinate me, because I am very hopelessly curious about everything and everybody. But I'm drinking Courvoisiers, and I told you earlier off camera that I have a compulsive obsessive. I haven't now because I'll probably choke on it, but I like to drink fluids. And I was having sip, but a lot of sips. And after about an hour and a half of this, I'm starting to feel the flight, the time difference, the Courvoisier. So I stood up and I thanked him for his time and told him that I was going to leave and wished him well. And before I got to the elevator, he stopped me and he said, I've got to tell you, you are absolutely one of the most interesting people I have ever met. And I told him nothing about myself. And so I get to the elevator and the Courvoisier hit me, and I'm leaning on the elevator, whatever you call the thing around the door, hoping and praying when the door opens, there's an elevator, not a shaft, because I was not very stable. And I was reflecting on the fact that this was a profound insight. If you want to be really interesting, all you have to do is be interested. And I realized everything is the polar opposite. You want to be respected, respect. You want to be admired, admire. You want to be acknowledged? Acknowledge. And it's very simple. It's very interesting. I don't know if that story is relevant, but it was very profound to me.
Well, it is, because you're talking about what you want to see in the universe is basically what you can give.
But it works. I'm not saying it's not metaphysical,
Yeah.
and it's not rah-rah, and it's not new agey. It's reality. That's a driver of great and profound success. And you want a life to be successful, but most people don't even know what success looks like.
And I want to tie it back with the fact that once you've had that conversation, you were left with some perspectives and ways.
It was profound.
So
Changed
now
my life.
That probably took that, like for anybody who's listening, who's kind of following that tunnel vision, which we started with, to expand it into funnel, is just a series of these amazing conversations with people that you never know. And if you're applying the Socratic thing, and by the way, everybody's going to get access to the video that shows you how to do better Socratic questioning, so that in any conversation that you're meeting, you can actually get to the right questions that bring out these amazing
And it's
answers.
wonderfully stimulating. I mean, Socratic interviewing and questioning is the most, it's the most exhilarating, it's the most fascinating, it's the most stimulating, it's the most fulfilling, and the most liberating thing you can do, because it's all, you can't do it if you're thinking at all about yourself. You have to be able to harness your ability to be totally externally focused. And you have to think about, a lot of people queue up, what am I going to say next? And they're so obsessed with thinking about how to look good or dominate or demonstrate how great they are, that they're not in the conversation. But when you do Socratic questioning, discussion, interviewing, communication, you're totally external focused. You can't not be, because you can't be great at it unless you're connected. And I'm thinking about you. What did you just say? What's the natural next step? What's the connection between what you just said and the next? What's it mean? And it's quite wonderful, because it forces you to develop something most of us have never experienced, which is external focus. Being focused on the other side, not me. And it gives you a power and an aura of I can't really identify the right feeling, but it's very powerful. It's something that transforms your impact in all aspects of your life.
And it's, to me, I'm just out of this conversation and just seeing how you're able to connect stories and everything that just expands everything that we're having conversations. Even as we're listening to this, I'm almost thrown back, because I am so looking forward to going through this Socratic process to be even better at the way that I do interviews, because there's a part of me that wants to make sure that the content is the most relevant for the audience. So I do think a lot about what to say next. But at the same time, I want to make sure that I'm asking the right questions.
Yes.
So with that, there's one thing that you said that I wanted to bring back, and it's this whole aspect. You seem like such a curious person.
Totally. I love discovery. I love learning. I love and am fascinated with all that I don't know. Anything, doesn't matter to me.
And so for someone who's practicing critical thinking, what's the role that curiosity plays? And if you're not naturally someone so curious, is it something you can nurture?
Well, it is absolutely affirmatively something you can not only nurture, but it self-fuels. In other words, if you can allow yourself, even awkwardly, and what we say is to anybody and anything you're going to do different than where you are comfortable today, you start doing it in an environment that's very safe, so you won't feel like you look bad. By the way, looking bad in an environment with somebody you've never talked to or been with is not going to matter. They aren't going to care that much, and they're not judging you that well. But if you start with your close specter or your close circle of friends or colleagues or employees or neighbors or church members, and just start talking and say, I always wondered, you're an accountant. I don't understand. What does an accountant do? Tell me how you look at it. How do you deal with clients? What are some of the issues that are fascinating? What are some of the problems that you or they solve? And just ask questions, listen to their answer. The answers should always provide a springboard to another question. And when you run out of time or you run out of thoughts, you can say, that's so interesting, I so appreciate it, and they'll want you for more. And then just do that everywhere. Have all your friends get you, say, I'd love to know what you do. I'd love to know about your business and who you sell to, and your, or if they don't do selling, What's it like to run a factory? What's it like? What are some of the issues? Tell me what it's like. Tell me some of the equipment. Tell me all your parts. I can't, and try to learn what you don't know and ask curious questions. See, I am very gifted, not because of my intellect, but because of my experiences. I have a context of reference that is, there's a concept, and you might know it in your work. It's called universal intelligence. And they talk about the 100 monkeys. Did you ever hear about that?
I did not know.
Well, it's probably expressed many different ways, but there's this island supposedly that all these monkeys figured out how to clean the sand off of potatoes, and they go 4 miles or 400 miles away, and there's another island, and monkeys have figured that out, and it's sort of a universal intelligence. When you've done it almost everything, as far as industries that I have, you have a context of understanding. So I can have a conversation with you that's very deep because I have a reference. I can ask you questions about things that you take for granted and go deeper than anybody's probably ever asked you. And it's fascinating because you've never thought about it. Most people can't. But that shouldn't thwart you or impede you from getting started. Don't be intimidated. Just ask questions and start with people you're comfortable with. Say, I'd love to know about what you do. I'd love to know about how you do it. I'd love to know about some of the elements. I don't even understand what is account payable, what is what is customer service, what kind of problems do you have, what do you do, what do people call about, what do you have to deal with, what's some of the most frequently, what are some of the most interesting ones. Ask anything. It's fascinating, and then listen. That's an easy start, don't you think?
Absolutely. So Jay, from this point, there's 2 other things I want to cover. One of them would be...
Ask me number 2 first. Just joking.
Well, actually, I will then.
Okay.
Which is, I want to get back to where the role of storytelling, metaphor, such, will play a role in critical thinking. But I also want to ask, you're asking a lot of questions. You're getting all these insights. Is there a point where you get a sense of overwhelm of information?
You only get that if you overthink it. The big problem with all that we're talking about is people try to over-intellectualize. They try to micromanage a wonderful process that the subconscious will manage for them if you let it. The subconscious mind is designed to take in an enormously greater amount of input than we give it. It is designed to process it, organize it, interconnect it, but we try to overthink it, and then we impede it. It's like putting a throttle on what is naturally there to serve us. If we don't overthink it, it'll do it. If we try to, what should I do with this? Don't worry about it, just take it in. And then when you're done, the most important thing, and this is true, critical thinking is very much enhanced when you can give yourself 5 or 10 minutes a couple of times a day in your daily life and stop and say, what just happened? What just happened in this experience? What just happened with this last 2 hours? What did we had a conversation. What did I do? What did they do? What did I really enjoy about what he said? How did he really impact me? What is it about that there's all kinds of ways to ascertain facets and dimensions of the human experience that the more you are geared towards it, the more you appreciate it. But you can't appreciate it if you just go through. Most people, if asked what happened yesterday, can't answer it. But if you stop and say, let's look at what just happened. What was the good? What was the bad? What did I like about myself? What did I not? Because a lot of people after a conversation or after an experience think, I should have said this, or I should have done that, or my answer could have been so much. Well, think about it and say, okay, you can't change a minute ago, but now the next time, critical thinking, when that happens, I'll be prepared. Or I'll think deeper. Or I'll stop and not try to be so impressive that I think I have to answer instantly and say, let me give a minute and think about it. No shame in reflection, but things like that.
Amazing. And now, I'd love to hear more about where the part of storytelling, metaphors, plays into the art of critical thinking.
Well, critical thinking is predicated on not just understanding, but communicating. Because the knowledge is only valuable if you can act on it. Act means proact, act means maximize, act means minimize. Maximize the good, minimize the bad danger or detour. But you can't do that if you're not communicating something, right? The best ways to communicate with clarity are to use metaphors, similes, stories. I just gave you just randomly 4 or 5 stories, but those stories probably easier and more powerfully and dimensionally and memorably denominate and demonstrate the point much better than if I tried to do it intellectually, don't you think?
Absolutely.
If you look at any religion, doesn't matter what it is, they make their point by parables. It's much more powerful. I'll give you another example. I am known for having been a voice of a concept years ago called the unique selling proposition. It was the definitive advantage that a company had or a product had or a person had against others. And I used to explain it very sophisticated and erudite. And I was doing it one time in front of Tony Robbins, and he took me aside afterwards and said, "You're making it so much harder to understand." He said, "Why don't you do this? Tell people, you know, when Federal Express first came out, they said, when it absolutely positively has to be there by 10 o'clock tomorrow, no mistakes whatsoever, FedEx. When Domino's first came out, they said hot, fresh, delicious pizza delivered to your door in 30 minutes or less, or it's yours free. When Nordstrom's, which is a big retail chain here, came out, they said if you're dissatisfied with any purchase for any reason, anytime you can have a credit, a refund, a replacement, no questions asked." That's a unique selling proposition, where that metaphor, that simile, that example is a lot better than me trying to explain it to you intellectually. Do you understand?
Yes. So,
People grasp it and they memorize it, and it indelibly instills itself so it haunts them positively.
So the moment you've accessed new data and you need to communicate it, it's always better to use the story methodologies.
This is like this.
Yeah.
And you give them something that is easily referenceable. So if I say, what I'm trying to explain to you is like, and I give you an example that everybody knows in a different light, then you go, "Oh, I get it." And then you remember it. And every time you remember it, it subliminally reinforces it. So it goes deeper in entrenching and rooting it, so it has a higher probability of working for you.
And Jay, I have to say, for the time that we spent together, we've not only covered concepts when it comes to critical thinking, but we've covered a lot of concepts, which is just about how to live a more fulfilling life and how to communicate with everyone, how to relate with people to just make a greater impact in the world. And what I'd love to do is kind of summarize the whole concepts that we've covered through this far and then get a chance to close. And one of the things I'm really excited about is that you're going to be able to find so much more information about how to apply critical thinking, and you'll also be able to discover so much more of Jay's work, because one of the things I find the most fascinating with you and the way that you deliver your content is when people go back to your website, you have so many ideas that are shared there for absolutely free. And people can dig in further and get more resources from you than any other person I think I've seen online. And for that, I'm extremely grateful.
There's a reason for it, and I'll share it with you.
Please.
I've been blessed to learn a multitude of ways that people can make not just their outcome better, but their output better as far as quality, contribution, value creation. But because of the way I do it and the pricing that I have, most people can't afford me. So if you're not going to be able to afford me, but you have the capacity to be a great contributor, and I can leverage my beliefs through you, I'm fine contributing. So we're big benefactors. We try to give everybody who can't really, at this point in their life, justify working with us. We try to, we think they're great investments. So we give people, 800 hours of materials. We give them videos. We give them books, complete books. Nothing sells anything. They don't even ask for an opt-in currently. And it's because it all comes back. And if you're going to be in business or you're going to be in a job, you owe it to yourself. You're stealing from yourself if you don't contribute everything you can in the process, not just to take, but to give, because that you're rewarded in your life from the value you create, the contribution you make, the problems you solve, the opportunities you make possible. It's a lot simpler than people want to make it.
I agree. I agree. And so what I'd love to do in closing is show how we've actually went through a lot of different topics, but it
Okay.
all came back to the same. Because what we're trying to do in this interview is we wanted to shake people up to stop going on autopilot and start really applying their critical thinking. And so the first thing we talked about is how critical thinking is so important so that you can contribute so much more value in any position that you're going to be in, whether you're the business owner or you're an employee within the company. And what I love the most is the fact that all of this critical thinking typically comes from having important, relevant conversations with people all around you. And we broke another rule here, which is how most people see relevancy based on how important they perceive another person, when in fact, every single person that you interact with has so much to contribute. And if you just become a lot more curious and you ask the Socratic way the right questions, you'll discover things from the people, whether they're up, down the hierarchy, different industries. There's so much for you to learn, and the more you learn there, you start moving away from being someone that operates in a tunnel vision, and you start expanding your funnel so you can draw ideas from every single area. And we've seen this in the way that we've had this interview happen was literally a manifestation of the teaching of critical thinking, because you've went and picked stories from so many different interactions you've had, and you have such a vast array of them that in any way that we take this, it seems that you're able to pull these nuggets because you've expanded the funnel so wide. And now in conclusion, we talked about how once you've expanded this funnel, you can actually take these and communicate them back using proper stories, proper metaphors, and you can start shifting the way an organization works. You start actually having a better input and being able to move things better. And in essence, you're making a greater impact. And the whole concept of thinking that, wow, if I start asking all these questions, interviewing all these people, I'll have my mind so filled with information that I'll feel overwhelmed, is again a complete brew, because our subconscious mind can handle so much more of this information. We just need to take a step back, realize that we overthink most things, and that we can actually just start communicating with more human beings and being a better critical thinker in the
You
process.
did a great job of summarizing. I'm impressed.
There we go.
That's great.
That's
I'm
what-
going to hire you to go with me, and every time I do a protracted or an ADD-based conversation and people are shaking their head, I'll say, wait a minute, Jason, I'll summarize.
Well, so that's my process, at least, for
That's great. It
making
was
sure that we
wonderful.
summarize
Very
everything.
impressive. Thank you.
Jay, I'd love to give you just a space to give some final words to everybody who's been listening. Like I said, there's going to be tons of reference material. There's so much that you teach, and I'm so honored that you'd be able to spend an hour with us here talking about critical thinking. What are some final thoughts you'd love to leave the audience with?
Well, there's a very interesting and I think appropriate sort of a saying that's not original. I'm not an original thinker, by the way. I don't think a lot of people who are great are. I think it's basically your original synthesizer. You take all this expanded knowledge and you integrate it together and you weave it into something new. But it's a lot of things you gain from lots of basic things that have already existed. You just learn them, you embrace them, and you combine them. But somebody that I really was impacted by years ago said, most people in life, and this is something you don't even know, because it's a lot of people don't verbalize. They don't know what's tormenting them, what's limiting them, what's driving them that they can't. I mean, what's really keeping them from enjoying and embracing the maximum level of joy, success, prosperity, and enrichment. Enrichment is denominated many different ways, but that's not the saying. The saying is this. The saying is this. Most people struggle non-verbally in life with the wrong question. They have this implicit, not explicit, sometimes explicit goal for themselves. It can be in career, can be in marriage, can be as a lover, can be as a parent, can be as a earner, can be as a business person, can be as a creator of a new product, and they always think they have all these aspirations that either they're aware of or they're driving them that they're not ever really acknowledging. But the real essence that they're struggling with is, am I worthy of this goal? Am I capable of achieving it? Am I really the person that can do it? I mean, am I going to fail? Am I going to succeed? And when you realize what's possible from time, from opportunity, from interaction, from collaboration, from discovery, from inquiry, from processing, from your subconscious, the right question to ask is not, am I worthy of this goal? It's the opposite. Is the goal worthy of me? And if you look at that in whatever aspect your life, your career, your relationships, your business. I mean, it should shift what you do, but the key is external focus. That's it.
Beautiful. Jay, thank you so much for
Oh,
your
my
time.
pleasure. Thank you. It's a privilege. And I'm really impressed with how you got it all together and organized the summary. I think that is really impressive. Thank you.
Not a problem. And so for everybody watching, thank you. And do look at the additional content video. What we're going to have is pull some of the most relevant content that's available from Jay's library so that you can consume it. You can learn the Socratic method. You can learn more about critical thinking. And if you go deeper into the collection from Jay Abraham, you're going to see that there's a vast wealth of information that you can look into that can just help you maximize whatever it is that you do so that with all you got, you can make the most output. So thank you so much.
Thank you.